Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, a podcast for all you wine lovers who, if you're like me, just cannot get enough of the good stuff. I'm Janina, your host, brand ambassador, wine educator, and sommelier. So stick with me as we dive deeper into this ever-evolving, wonderful world of wine. And wherever you are listening to this, cheers to you. Hello, wine friends, and welcome back to another episode where today we are heading straight into Bordeaux. Now, this episode is one of my deep dives designed for those studying for the WSET Diploma D3 exam and tackling the wine regions of the world in detail. But it's also perfect if you simply want to nerd out, build some confidence with Bordeaux, and really understand the appellations, the winemaking styles, and how climate and place shape what ends up in the glass. You'll take away from this episode, first, a clear understanding of Bordeaux key grape varieties and the style of wine they produce. Second, a breakdown of the major appellations on both the left bank and right bank and what truly defines their styles. And third, a practical grasp of how Bordeaux is made, from vineyard decisions through to winemaking choices and aging. Throughout, this is delivered in an audio flashcard style. I'll be asking you questions as we go, so you can either pause and think or just listen and absorb it in real time. Now, as I said, this is part of the deep dive series, so if you haven't listened yet to Languedoc-Roussillon or the Rhone Valley episodes, you're going to find links to those in my show notes. So now, pour yourself a glass, ideally of Bordeaux, get comfortable, or get your pen and paper out, and let's dive in. So let's start with the location of Bordeaux, its rivers and estuary, and where, in fact, the left bank and the right bank sits. So, Bordeaux is found in the southwest of France, and this is close to the Atlantic Ocean. It is traversed by the river Garonne and the river Dordogne, and they merge to form the Gironde estuary. Now, the vineyards to the west of the Garonne and Gironde form what is collectively known as the left bank, whilst those to the east of the Dordogne and Gironde form what is collectively known as the right bank. And then there is a large area between the two tidal rivers, Dordogne and Garonne. What is this called? So this is Entre deux Mers. And how much red, white, and sweet wine is made in Bordeaux? Well, if we're talking about the production of AOC wine, 85% is red, 9% is dry white, and actually less than 1% is sweet wines. And you also, let's not forget the pink, have 5% made into rosé wine. Now, quick history lesson. What do the Dutch have to do with Bordeaux? Well, in the 17th and 18th centuries, the Médoc area north of Bordeaux was actually mostly marshland and not good for farming at all. And it was, in fact, the Dutch workers that were based in Bordeaux, with their knowledge, that drained it and turned it into vineyards. And what about the estates and the wine merchants and brokers? Well, in the mid-1700s, wines from estates like Lafite and Margaux were already famous across Europe and even in America. Bordeaux had also long been an important centre for exporting wine from nearby regions like Bergerac. And then this created a strong group of wine merchants and brokers, with many coming from Britain, Ireland, Germany and Holland. And these merchants helped sell Bordeaux wines around the world and built their reputation internationally. And that system, where merchants rather than producers handle much of the trade, still exists today. And what about 1855? What happened? Well, in that year, during a major Paris exhibition called the Exposition Universelle, Bordeaux winebrokers were asked to create an official ranking of the region's wines, and they based this mainly on price. The top Médoc estates, along with Haut-Brion in Grave, were divided into 5 growth levels and saw turns into 3. Now, earlier classifications had existed, but this one became official and has barely changed since. In fact, if you want to know a little bit more in detail about the 1855 Bordeaux classification, I talk about that in episode 239, literally 1 minute and 42 seconds into the episode. So go back and have a quick listen. It's about 4 minutes long. Equally, episode 185 is on La Place de Bordeaux. And episode 182 is with Jane Anson, Bordeaux expert, on En Primeur. So I'll put those links in the show notes. So let's now get on to climate. So what kind of climate does Bordeaux have and what shapes it? So Bordeaux has a mild maritime climate, and it's shaped by that Atlantic Ocean that we talked about. It is warmed by the Gulf Stream, which comes all the way from the Gulf of Mexico, and it brings a steady warming influence across the region. What creates the best vintages in Bordeaux? Well, the best vintages happen when you have a warm growing season, enough rainfall during the year to support growth and ripening, and then a relatively dry and warm early autumn. So this allows grapes to ripen slowly and completely, producing that balance of tannins, sugar, acidity, which is one reason great Bordeaux wines can age so well. Now let's talk forests. How do forests and the geography affect the left bank climate? So the left bank is partly protected from Atlantic storms by those large pine forests called the Landes, and areas close to these forests, like, for example, Domaine de Chevalier in Pessac-Léognan and parts of Listrac in the Médoc, are slightly cooler and more marginal than areas further east. In the northern Médoc, there is less forest protection and the landscape's more open, so it's more exposed to maritime weather and therefore cooler than the southern Médoc and Grave area. So how variable is rainfall in Bordeaux, and does it matter? Rainfall averages about 950 millimeters a year, but it varies a lot from year to year, and also in timing, which is really important for vine health and for vintage quality, because too much rain at key moments can cause problems like flowering. If you have too much rain at flowering, you get poor fruit set. If it rains during the growing season, disease pressure increases. If it rains at or after veraison, grapes may not ripen properly and can develop fungal disease. And if it rains at harvest, flavors can become diluted. So how is climate change affecting Bordeaux wines? Well, climate change has led to hotter and drier summers with less reliable rainfall. Bordeaux's grape varieties are fairly hardy and can handle extremes, but hot, dry years like the famous 2003 can produce wines with lower acidity and less balance. So these conditions can also lead to higher alcohol levels because growers often wait longer for full phenolic ripeness before picking grapes. Now, does the climate change across Bordeaux regions? Well, the answer is yes. I think we kind of touched on that. That maritime influence is weaker in the right bank areas, which is including Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. But it is still present and it still affects the growing conditions. Now let's talk about extreme weather events. What affects Bordeaux vineyards? Well, frost and hail are major risks. Severe frost years include 1956, 1991 and 2017 when crops were heavily damaged or massively reduced. In the Médoc, vineyards close to the Gironde estuary are more protected because the water moderates temperature and it reduces frost risk. Vineyards just a short distance away can be much more exposed and really badly affected. Hail is more unpredictable, but has become more widespread and destructive in recent years. And how much can production vary from year to year? Well, vintage variation is significant. For example, in 2017, frost reduced production by about 33% compared to the 10-year average and about 40% compared to the large 2016 harvest. So this level of variation has major financial consequences for estates and for the wider Bordeaux wine industry. Okay, are you ready, my soil geeks? Here we go. How important is soil in Bordeaux? Well, soil plays a major role in the quality and the style of Bordeaux wines, influencing drainage, heat retention, and how the vines ripen. So what are the main soil types on the left bank? So the left bank, including the Médoc to the north and Graves to the south, is known for gravel and stony soils. And these were deposited thousands of years ago by floodwaters coming from the Pyrenees and the Massif Central. What is mixed in with the gravel soils, though? So the gravel is often mixed with clay and sand, and it just depends on its origin. Now, are these gravel areas large and continuous? The answer is no. The gravel forms low mounds called croupe, and they do not cover the whole region. The highest point is only about 32 metres in Margaux, and you'll find all the top estates on the left bank are planted on these gravel mounds. So why is gravel so important for vine growing? Well, gravel drains well, unlike clay. So after rain or storms, which are pretty common on the left bank, water drains quickly and the vine roots dry out and the grapes can continue to ripen. So can good drainage ever be a problem, though? So the answer is yes. There's always a problem. In very hot years like 2003 and 2005, excellent drainage can lead to drought stress, especially where soils are shallow. So for example, in places like Pomerol, where soils are often less than 1 metre deep, vines can struggle in really dry years, such as 2016. Now, what is the second key benefit of gravel soils? Well, gravel retains heat. So after a warm day, the stones store heat and they slowly release it back towards the vines, helping grapes ripen steadily. Now, are there other soil types on the left bank? I think I alluded to that. The answer is yes. There are pockets of clay, especially in Saint-Estèphe. Now, these soils produce wines that are robust and they're characterful, but they have not achieved the same acclaim as wines grown on gravel. Now, how do soils differ on the right bank? Well, the right bank has far more clay in the soil overall, although there are also significant patches of gravel in parts of the Le Bonnet. Now, how does soil influence grape variety on the right bank? So clay soils are ideal for Merlot, which is the dominant grape variety of the right bank. And where do the best right bank wines come from? So the best wines come from vineyards on the limestone plateau or from gravel soils that border Pomerol. Now let's get to the grape varieties, starting with Merlot, seeing as we're talking of Pomerol. So what kind of grape is Merlot in terms of growth cycle? Merlot's a early budding variety, which makes it vulnerable in spring frosts. It's also a mid-ripening grape, so it can usually be picked before early autumn rains. But what are the main risks when growing Merlot? So Merlot is susceptible to colour, drought, and most botrytis bunch rot. And because of these risks, careful sorting is needed at harvest, and all of them can reduce yields. So why is Merlot useful in Bordeaux? A key advantage is that Merlot can ripen fully in cooler years, especially compared to the later ripening Cabernet Sauvignon. And I think everybody listening probably already knows that Merlot is most important. It's the dominant grape variety on the right bank, but it is also important in the cooler northern Médoc, where soils are more fertile and have a higher clay content. But why does Merlot do so well in clay soils? So clay soils have strong water holding capacity, which suits Merlot, and it helps it produce its naturally large berry size. How does Merlot, though, compare to Cabernet in sugar and alcohol? So Merlot tends to reach higher sugar levels than Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc, meaning it can produce higher potential alcohol. And this was an advantage in earlier decades, but of course, it's less so today due to warming growing conditions. Now, what flavour profile does Merlot bring to Bordeaux blends? Well, in cooler years, it shows medium to pronounced red fruit flavours like strawberry and red plum with herbal notes. And then in warmer years, it shifts to cooked blackberry and black plum, and it contributes medium tannins and medium to high alcohol. So let's go across to Cabernet Sauvignon. What is the bud break characteristic of Cabernet Sauvignon, and what advantage does this give? So it is a late budding variety which helps protect it from spring frosts. And how does Cabernet Sauvignon ripen, and what risk does this create? Well, because it ripens late, requiring warm growing conditions, it also means it's vulnerable to early autumn rains. And what are the key physical traits of the Cabernet Sauvignon grape? So it has these small berries, it has thick skins, which contribute to a high tannin level in the resulting wines. And where does Cabernet Sauvignon produce its highest quality fruit? Well, on warm, well-drained soils such as the gravel soils of the Médoc. Now, let's talk disease. There's always disease. What is Cabernet Sauvignon particularly prone to? It is susceptible to fungal diseases, especially powdery mildew, as well as trunk diseases such as Eutypa and Esca. What aromatic and structural contributions does Cabernet Sauvignon make in Bordeaux? So, it gives violet, blackcurrant, black cherry, and sometimes menthol or herbal notes, along with medium alcohol, high acidity, and high tannins. What happens when Cabernet Sauvignon struggles to ripen in cooler Bordeaux seasons? Well, it can result in wines with high acidity, unripe tannins, and a lot less fruit character. And why then is Cabernet Sauvignon often blended in Bordeaux? Well, I assume you know where I'm going with this, because it can struggle to fully ripen in cooler years, and therefore it is blended with earlier ripening varieties like Merlot and Cabernet Franc. So let's talk Cabernet Franc, also one of the main grapes made as a single variety in the Loire Valley. Now, when does Cabernet Franc bud, and what risk does this create? Well, it is an early budding variety which makes it vulnerable to spring frosts. And what yield issue is Cabernet Franc prone to? It is prone to coulure, which can significantly reduce yields. Now, when does Cabernet Franc typically ripen, and why is this important? So it is a mid-ripening variety, so it can often be harvested before the autumn rain arrives. Now, what happens if Cabernet Franc doesn't ripen fully? Well, the wines can show this overly leafy, herbaceous character. And how has viticulture helped reduce herbaceous character in Cabernet Franc? Well, with better canopy management, such as avoiding dense canopies and increasing leaf removal, combined with warmer summers, has really helped to reduce that excessive herbaceousness. Now, what climate advantage does Cabernet Franc have? Well, it is winter hardy and it makes it well suited to cooler growing regions. And lastly, what does Cabernet Franc contribute in Bordeaux blends? Well, it contributes red fruit aromas, high acidity, and medium tannins. Now let's talk Malbec, which is also known as Côte, particularly in the Cahors region in southwest France. How does Malbec behave in the vineyard in terms of vigour? So it's a vigorous variety, so it requires careful canopy and yield management depending on the style of wine desired. And what yield issue is Malbec prone to? It is susceptible to colour, which can reduce yields. So what are the typical characteristics of traditional style Malbec wines? They are usually deep ruby in colour with violet, red, black plum fruit notes. They typically show medium to pronounced fruit intensity depending on quality level, medium to medium plus acidity, and medium plus to high tannins. Now, what happened to Malbec in Bordeaux after the 1956 frosts? Well, after the severe frosts of that year, Malbec was largely replaced by Merlot, which is easier to grow in the Bordeaux culture. Now, Petit Verdot. When does Petit Verdot bud and ripen? Well, it buds early, and it ripens even later than Cabernet Sauvignon. So, why was Petit Verdot unpopular with Bordeaux growers in the past? The reason is because it is vulnerable to spring frosts, can struggle to ripen in cool years, and is at risk from rain around harvest time. However, it performs best in the warmer parts of the Médoc. Now, how much Petit Verdot is typically used in Bordeaux blends? It is usually used in very small amounts, often making up less than 5% of the blend. But what does it give? What does it contribute to Bordeaux blends? So it gives deep colour, powerful structure, spice notes, and high tannins. I think you can probably guess, why is Petit Verdot becoming more valued today? Well, although plantings remain still quite limited, warmer growing seasons mean it is now more likely to ripen successfully in most vintages. That is your reds that we're going to talk about today. Obviously, there's a little bit of Cabernet planted as well, but let's get on to the whites. Semillon. Now, when does Semillon ripen, and what type of rot is it susceptible to? So Semillon is a mid-ripening variety that is susceptible to both botrytis bunch rot and, in the right conditions, noble rot. And how productive is Semillon in the vineyard? Well, it is capable of producing high yields. What are the typical characteristics of Semillon wines? So Semillon typically is going to show you this low intensity apple and lemon flavours. If it's underripe, you're going to get some grassy notes. It usually has a medium body, medium alcohol, and medium to medium plus acidity. Now, what does Semillon contribute to high quality, dry, white Bordeaux blends? It is going to give you the weight, the body, medium acidity, and low to medium intensity aromas. And what that does, it's going to help to soften Sauvignon Blanc's higher acidity and more intense flavours. And also Semillon has a strong affinity with vanilla and sweet spice flavours from new French oak. So what does Semillon contribute to botrytis affected sweet Bordeaux wines? It's going to give you that pronounced honey and dried fruit characters such as dried lemon and peach, along with a waxy texture. And why do top Sauternes wines often contain a high proportion of Semillon? Well, it's because Semillon is more susceptible to botrytis than Sauvignon Blanc, making it especially valuable in noble rot wines. Examples of producers using more Semillon include Chateau Clément and Chateau d'Yquem. And lastly, why is Semillon valued for aging? Well, it develops this complex toast and honeyed notes with age, unlike Sauvignon Blanc, whose flavour tends to remain a little bit more static over time. So, talking of Sauvignon Blanc, another single varietal wine found in the central vineyards of the Loire, but what does Sauvignon Blanc contribute to Bordeaux blends? Well, it's going to give you the grassy flavours, the gooseberry fruit, along with high acidity. And what styles of Bordeaux wine is Sauvignon Blanc used for? Well, it's used for both dry white Bordeaux blends and sweet botrytis affected wines. And how has the global popularity of Sauvignon Blanc influenced winemaking? Well, its worldwide popularity has led to increasing production of predominantly or single variety dry Sauvignon Blanc wines in Bordeaux. And lastly, let's look at the grape variety Muscadel, which it is worth pointing out is not related to Muscat. However, they do share similar aromatic qualities. So what site conditions does Muscadel require? Muscadel needs to be planted in well-exposed sites because it is highly susceptible to botrytis bunch rot. Now, what style of wine is most Muscatel used for? The vast majority is used in sweet white wines. And what is the flavour that Muscatel is going to contribute to that wine? Well, it's going to give you floral and grapey aromas and flavours. Now, that is your grapes done. Tick. Let's head out to the vineyard and talk about the management. So, what is the traditional vine planting density in top quality Bordeaux vineyards? The traditional planting density is 10,000 vines per hectare, with vines planted 1 metre apart and 1 metre between rows. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of close vine spacing in Bordeaux? Well, it suits the region's relatively infertile soils, helping to create moderate vine vigour, and it makes the best use of expensive vineyard land. However, it does increase costs because more vines and trellising are needed, specialist over-the-road tractors may be required, and more labour is needed for vine training, ploughing and spraying. Now, are all Bordeaux vineyards planted at high density? The answer is no. Less prestigious appellations often use lower planting densities. For example, basic Bordeaux AOC may be planted at around 3,000 to 4,000 vines per hectare. But what is the most common vine training and pruning system in Bordeaux? Well, the most common system is head-trained replacement cane pruned, with canes trained along wires. And there is a difference between the Bordeaux left bank and right bank. On the left bank, double Guyot using 2 canes is common, whereas on the right bank, single Guyot using 1 cane is more common. But what is the alternative pruning system used in some Bordeaux vineyards? The answer is cordon-trained spur-pruned vines. They're used occasionally, especially by some prestigious estates. And the reason for this is that they believe it naturally lowers yields and improves bunch aeration. But why is canopy management particularly important in Bordeaux? Well, this is a climate answer. Bordeaux's moderate and damp climate increases disease pressure. So canopy management helps reduce downy mildew, powdery mildew and botrytis bunch rot. But why can heavy rainfall worsen mildew problems in Bordeaux? So the rain, it can prevent tractors entering vineyards for spraying, and it can wash away the treatments, making disease pressure worse. So let's talk leaf removal. This is often carried out in Bordeaux vineyards during the summer. So why? Well, leaf removal improves air circulation, it helps deter rot, and exposes grapes to ultraviolet light, which aids in the ripening. But there is a risk of excessive leaf removal. What is it? Well, leaves protect bunches from sunburn and extreme heat. So removing too many can expose grapes to damage. As an example, in 2003, we've already mentioned this year, some grapes became raisined due to excessive heat exposure. So leaf removal is considered less risky later in the season when extreme heat is less likely and the bunches can still benefit from improved aeration. Now, what trunk diseases are major concerns in Bordeaux? I have already mentioned this. The answer is Eutypa dieback and Esca. These are the major problems because they rot the vine internally. But when thinking about trunk disease, what is soft pruning and why is it becoming more popular? So soft pruning involves making smaller cuts, leaving extra wood near cuts to dry out and preserving sap flow. And it appears to help reduce trunk disease and is increasingly popular across Europe. Okay, what about this one? Have you heard of Flavescence Dorée? What is it and how is it controlled? It is another vine disease, but it can be controlled with insecticides. Although you can imagine this concerns organic and biodynamic producers because of the fact that they will not use synthetic chemicals. So how much of Bordeaux's vineyard area was certified organic or in conversion in 2021? So as of that year, 18% of Bordeaux's vineyards were certified organic or in conversion. And what is bunch thinning and why was it introduced? So bunch thinning is the removal of grape clusters by hand or machine to reduce excessive yields and improve flavour concentration. However, there's always a however, sorry. Some viticulturalists believe it can unbalance the vine and prefer winter pruning as a better way to control yields. And so the modern philosophy now towards yield management in Bordeaux is the focus on allowing vines to find their natural balance, avoiding corrective intervention unless necessary. So how has Bordeaux yields changed over the past 2 decades? Well, yields have fallen and now average around 50 hectolitres per hectare, which has improved wine quality. However, the problem with the trend towards extreme low yields is it is often creating these overly concentrated wines that are just jammy or tiring and obscuring the wine's sense of place. So this extreme low yield approach is now declining because it can reduce nuance and terroir expression, which are hallmarks of fine Bordeaux. Now, large estates may employ more than 100 workers during harvest, and many are hired from other EU countries and are housed by the estates during harvest. But why is hand harvesting difficult in some parts of Bordeaux, such as the northern Médoc? Well, labour shortages occur because these vineyards can be 2 hours from Bordeaux, making commuting difficult. So many Bordeaux vineyards use machine harvesting as it is often more economical and can be necessary when labour is scarce. But an estate may also use machines for higher quality fruit when disease pressure is high and when rain or storms are forecast, so that they can just pick the grapes quickly. But it is most commonly grapes for high volume, inexpensive wines that are typically machine harvested, as it allows growers to pick at the ideal moment without depending on harvest team availability. But top Bordeaux estates still prefer hand harvesting because it provides greater quality control, which is why it remains the standard for top estates. So let's go into the winery now. Grape sorting varies in Bordeaux winemaking, as it depends on wine value and vintage quality. Inexpensive wines are usually not sorted, while high quality wines may be sorted during picking by hand, on sorting belts, or by optical sorting in very well-funded estates. In exceptional vintages, top estates may skip winery sorting if the fruit is already uniformly high quality due to vineyard sorting. For high quality wines, plot by plot winemaking often happens, which is where individual vineyard parcels are harvested at optimal ripeness and vinified separately into small batches. This, of course, requires careful harvesting decisions and more small fermentation vessels, increasing costs but improving quality. So let's talk about red winemaking. How is red Bordeaux typically fermented and in what vessels? How do winemakers manage the extraction? Well, fermentation takes place in closed vats with pump overs, and cultured yeast is commonly used for reliability. The wine will be fermented in wood, stainless steel, and concrete vessels, all with temperature control, and it depends on style and vintage quality for how they manage extraction. However, mainly it is through fermentation temperature and maceration time. Now, what is typical for early drinking red wines and then for long-aged red wines in terms of fermentation? Well, early drinking reds will typically see mid-range fermentation temperatures and short skin contact. So we're talking about 5 to 7 days. The idea is to preserve the fruit and limit tannin extraction. Whereas for long-aged reds, they're going to see warmer fermentations and extended maceration of 14 to 30 days. The idea of this is to build structure and tannins. Now, after draining, skins are pressed using pneumatic or vertical hydraulic presses. Press wine is kept separate, like the free run juice, into 225-litre barrels known as barriques and later blended depending on the desired structure. Malolactic conversion will take place either in tanks or barrels, sometimes with inoculation and cellar heating to ensure completion before en primeur tastings. A simpler red wine ages in stainless steel, concrete or large vats for 4 to 6 months, sometimes with oak chips added for flavour, whereas a high-quality red Bordeaux wine ages in French oak barriques using a mix of new 1- and 2-year-old barrels, typically for 18 to 24 months. But it is worth pointing out that the proportion of new oak has generally been decreasing in recent years. Now, how do winemakers choose barrels, and how are red Bordeaux wines aged and managed in barrel? Well, it's normal that they often choose multiple cooperages and medium to medium plus toast levels for complexity. And the wine inside these barrels are typically racked every 3 months, although some winemakers avoid racking and prefer to use micro-oxygenation instead. Now, blending done in Bordeaux typically happens either in winter before en primeur tastings or closer to bottling, depending on the estate. So why do most estates blend in winter? Well, this is to prepare final blends early and allocate wine into first, second, and maybe even third labels or bulk sales perhaps, but some estates delay blending to observe how much each lot evolves before making final blending decisions. Now, quickly to rosé. What rosé styles are produced in Bordeaux and what grapes are commonly used? So there's 2 styles. You've got the traditional darker claret and lighter modern rosé, and mainly using Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon grapes. The traditional rosé in Bordeaux is made either from saignée, so the bleeding off method, or short maceration, often as a byproduct of red winemaking with the idea of producing a deeper coloured red wine, whereas the modern pale rosé is typically made by direct pressing for that lighter colour and fresher style. That's it for rosé. Let's go to white winemaking. What are the options for white winemaking from a early drinking perspective, mid-priced wine, and then high quality Bordeaux wine? Well, firstly, all winemakers will choose if they are either pressing immediately or leaving on skins for up to 24 hours before pressing. Direct pressing is going to give you the freshness, whilst short skin contact increases aromatic and phenolic complexity, but requires very healthy grapes. Early drinking white Bordeaux wines are typically made with cool fermentation in stainless steel, followed by a few months aging before clarification and bottling. Mid-priced white Bordeaux wines are often aged on fine lees for 6 to 12 months to increase weight and complexity, and high-quality white Bordeaux wines are fermented and aged in barrels, often with varying levels of new oak. Malolactic fermentation is often blocked to preserve freshness and acidity, and bâtonnage, which is the stirring of the lees to add texture, is used less now as it can make wines too heavy in warm vintages. And there is now a more modern winemaking focus on using more Sauvignon Blanc, skin contact for aromatics, and reduced new oak influence. And should you want to know, this contemporary style is owed a great deal to the work of Professor Denis de Bourdieu and André Le Temps. Okay, how was my French? No complaints sent into my email, please. Now on to the sweet wines. So what is the key vineyard requirement for sweet Bordeaux wines? Well, very low yields, often 1/3 of dry wine levels to achieve that high sugar concentration, and those yields are controlled through strict pruning and removal of diseased or damaged fruit. Now, what yield levels are typical in top sweet wine estates? So you have the 25 hectolitre per hectare maximum allowed in the top appellations, but often the top estates bring in fruit as low as 10 hectolitres per hectare or lower. Now, what skill is required of harvesters for sweet wines, and why and how many multiple vineyard passes are needed for sweet wines? Well, firstly, harvesters have to be able to distinguish noble rot from grey and black rot. And they need to go through the vineyard many times to selectively pick berries or bunches affected by noble rot at the optimal moment. And this might be 10 to 12 times in some vintages. And that means harvest can last from September through to November. So what factors influence the level of botrytis in sweet wines? Well, the climate conditions, which can vary from year to year. The vineyard location, are you close to the area where mist forms regularly or not? The willingness to delay harvest for optimum ripeness, as you may risk losing your whole crop if the weather turns bad, and also the willingness to conduct multiple picking passes, as we've already mentioned. Now, how are sweet wines fermented and aged, and how might a top sweet wine be matured? So, they are fermented like dry wines, but often fermented and aged in tanks or barrels with varying container use depending on quality. The highest quality are typically barrel fermented and aged for 18 to 36 months with significant new oak. So we could be talking 30 to 50%, sometimes up to 100% in estates like Chateau de Chem. So the new oak is important as it enhances complexity and integration, but of course significantly increases production cost. So a less prestigious sweet wine is often unoaked and released much earlier, around a year after harvest. Okay, Bordeaux appellations, are you ready? So as a quick overview of the appellations, there are 65 of them in Bordeaux. Most regulations simply list the permitted grape varieties rather than enforcing fixed proportions. However, the left bank wines are dominated by Cabernet Sauvignon, whilst red bank wines are dominated by Merlot. Bordeaux AOC is the large regional appellation covering red, white and rosé wines. What are the yield limits in Bordeaux AOC? So the answer is 67 hectolitres per hectare for white, 62 for rosé and 60 for red wines. What characterises Bordeaux Supérieur AOC? So it has lower yields, 59 hectolitres per hectare for red, slightly stricter rules on aging and alcohol, and is generally higher quality than Bordeaux AOC. Bordeaux AOC and Bordeaux Supérieur AOC together account for 44% of Bordeaux production, with the typical style of Bordeaux AOC red wines, usually Merlot based, with medium red fruit, high acidity, medium plus tannins, medium body, and medium alcohol. And the typical style of Bordeaux AOC white wines is Sauvignon Blanc dominant, showing that gooseberry and lemon fruit characters, medium body, high acidity, and medium alcohol. So now, to the left bank of the Gironde, you have Médoc AOC and Haut-Médoc AOC producing only red wines. What are the yield limits in Médoc and Haut-Médoc? So 55 hectolitres per hectare. However, I realise I'm mentioning lots of yields, and I want to point out that all these numbers I am giving you are the official numbers from the WSET Diploma textbook, as the INAO can modify the maximum yield annually. So you will see different numbers if you are looking on the internet. So how do Médoc and Haut-Médoc differ? Well, Médoc is further north and often more Merlot based, whilst Haut-Médoc is closer to Bordeaux and includes the 4 famous commune appellations. So what defines the 4 famous left bank communes? So the famous 4 are Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, Saint-Julien and Margaux, and they are known for gravel soils, Gironde estuary moderating influence, and high quality Cabernet Sauvignon based wines with maximum yields of 57 hectolitres per hectare. What is the general style of wines from the 4 top left bank communes? So you're going to get pronounced blackcurrant, green pepper in cooler years, red plum, cedar and vanilla oak with medium plus body, high tannins and great aging potential. So let's look a little deeper at the 4 of them, starting with Saint-Estèphe. What defines Saint-Estèphe AOC and what style of red does it produce? So as the most northern and coolest Médoc commune, as it's closest to the Atlantic Ocean, it has more clay soils and a higher proportion of Merlot. Now, traditionally, the style is more rustic and tannic, often needing more aging, though modern wines can be softer. It has no first growths, but it does have second growths and a large number of cru bourgeois. Pauillac. What is the key feature of Pauillac AOC plantings and its style? Well, very high Cabernet Sauvignon content, often 70 to 80% in top estates, and it is highly structured, often the most structured of the left bank, powerful with high tannins, high acidity, and exceptional aging potential. Pauillac has 3 of the 5 first growths. It also has the highest proportion of cru classé wine, around 85% of production, followed closely by Saint-Julien. So Saint-Julien, how does this compare stylistically? Well, it sits between Pauillac's power and Margaux's finesse. It has no first growths, but 5 second growths. So what defines Margaux AOC stylistically, and how does its soils and location affect the wine? Well, you're going to get elegance, perfume, and these silky tannins. There is slightly more Merlot and slightly less Cabernet Sauvignon than the other top communes, because alongside the stony, gravelly soils, there are clay seams running through, and grapes ripen a few days earlier due to being slightly further south, which helps in cooler years or when rain is threatening. Okay, so how does Listrac Médoc and Moulis differ from the top communes? So these appellations, they are further from the river, so less moderating influence there. They have less gravel soils. The quality level is generally good to very good and medium priced to premium. But what is Grape AOC known for, and what is the top subregion of Grape called? Right, with Grape, this is the large appellation south of the city of Bordeaux. That's where we are now. And it's producing both red and white wines. 85% of the wines are red, and maximum yields are limited to 58 hectolitres per hectare for white and 55 hectolitres per hectare for red. Pessac-Léognan is the top subregion of Grape, producing the best white wines in Bordeaux and high quality reds too. Most Grape AOC wine is acceptable to good quality and inexpensive to mid-priced. Bordeaux Supérieur AOC is restricted to late-picked and botrytis-affected sweet wines, which allows higher yields than Sauternes at 40 hectolitres per hectare. Now, coming back to Pessac-Léognan, it has both the gravel soils and the moderating effect of the Garonne River, like the top communes of the Médoc. It is known for high quality, often barrel fermented and aged white wines and high quality red wines. The red-white production split in Pessac-Léognan is around 80% red and 20% white. It includes one first growth from the 1855 classification and all of the cru classé properties of the Grape classification. It has the reputation for producing the best white wines of Bordeaux. Maximum yield is 54 hectolitres per hectare for both red and white wines. And now, what is the blend and the typical white wine characteristics in Pessac-Léognan? Well, it's a blend of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, and you will find wines with gooseberry, citrus fruit, vanilla and clove oak, medium plus body, medium plus to high acidity, and medium to high alcohol. These are good to outstanding and can command premium pricing. The reds can be similar in style and price point to the 4 top communes of Médoc. Now, let's go to the Entre-deux-Mers, which is a wine region in Bordeaux whose name means between two seas, and that's referring to the Garonne and the Dordogne rivers. So this is a region found between the right and the left bank. So what is Entre-deux-Mers AOC known for, and what style of wine do you get? So it produces only white wine with a maximum yield of 65 hectolitres per hectare and produces light, fresh, inexpensive to mid-priced white wines. It is in fact the second largest appellation in terms of hectares, although much smaller than Bordeaux AOC. Now, there is lots of red grapes planted in this area, but they would be labelled as Bordeaux or Bordeaux Supérieur. So let's head across to the right bank appellations now. What defines the right bank in Bordeaux? Well, smaller estates, cooler clay soils as we've talked about, and the dominance of Merlot, followed by Cabernet Franc, and then small plantings of Cabernet Sauvignon. So what is the main grape in Saint-Emilion? I feel like, well, we already know this. It is Merlot at around 60%, followed by Cabernet Franc. But what is the difference between Saint-Emilion AOC and Saint-Emilion Grand Cru AOC? So the Grand Cru has lower yields and longer aging requirements, 46 hectolitres per hectare as opposed to 53 hectolitres per hectare, and longer minimum maturation time, so 20 months as opposed to 6 months. So what is the style of top Saint-Emilion wines? Well, they're going to be full-bodied, high alcohol, medium plus to high acidity, with red and black plum fruit and new oak spice capable of long aging. Saint-Emilion has its own classification system, and you can find wines of all quality ranges, from the more simple up to that same quality as the first growths over on the left bank. Now, there are 4 Saint-Emilion satellites. These are 4 AOCs that are close to Saint-Emilion but further away from the River Dordogne. They make similar wines to Saint-Emilion AOC and follow the same rules. The 2 largest satellites are Montagne Saint-Emilion AOC and Lussac Saint-Emilion AOC. Now, I know you know. What is the dominant grape in Pomerol? It's Merlot at around 80%, with Cabernet Franc as the next planted, with maximum yields at 49 hectolitres per hectare. There is no classification system in Pomerol, but many top quality estates. And so why are Pomerol wines typically so expensive? The answer is small vineyard sizes. As an example, Petrus has just 12 hectares, whilst many of the first growths on the left bank have 80 to 100 hectares each. Here in Pomerol, it is extremely limited production. The wines are typically very good to outstanding and premium to super premium in price. Now, what is the style of Pomerol wines? So they're rich, concentrated, silky wines with red and black plum fruit, with noticeable vanilla and clove new oak character, with a full body, high alcohol, medium plus to high acidity, and medium plus to high tannins, and strong aging potential. The primary satellite appellation of Pomerol is La Lande de Pomerol, located directly north of the prestigious Pomerol region, and it allows slightly higher yields than Pomerol AOC. So what is Côte de Bordeaux AOC? So this is a group of right bank appellations created in 2009, producing red and white wines, often with commune names attached. What are their names? So there's Blé or Blé Côte de Bordeaux, Cadillac, Castillon, and Franc. For red wines, the maximum yield is 55 hectolitres per hectare and 52 hectolitres per hectare if a commune name is appended. Now, what about Côte de Bordeaux? This is a Merlot-led appellation with a strong focus on Malbec, more than any other Bordeaux region. It is similar to the Côte de Bordeaux AOC, but it is not under that umbrella. And finally, you're going to be happy, we're nearly there, to the sweet wine appellations. What are the two main appellations in the southern part of the Grape region, and what is planted? So we are talking about Sauternes AOC and Barsac AOC, and Semillon accounts for around 80% of plantings, followed by Sauvignon Blanc and then small amounts of Muscadel. So what actually creates the noble rock conditions in Sauternes? So it's the meeting of the cool Gironde and warm Garonne rivers, creating morning mists and sunny afternoons, drying the grapes so that grey rot doesn't develop. Now, as we already mentioned, the yield limit in Sauternes and Barsac is 25 hectolitres per hectare, though actual yields are often much lower. And Barsac may be labelled as either Barsac AOC or Sauternes AOC, so they have a choice. And what is the style of Sauternes and Barsac wines? Imagine honeyed citrus peel, tropical fruit, vanilla oak, full body, sweet, of course, medium to medium plus acidity, and high alcohol. And these wines range from good to outstanding, with prices ranging from mid-priced to super premium. However, demand has decreased over the past 30 years, so now wineries are often producing a dry wine too, to guarantee income. And to finally finish, there are a few other sweet wine appellations on both banks of the Garonne. Can you name them? So you have Sainte-Croix-de-Mont and Loupiac, with maximum yields of 40 hectolitres per hectare, and Premier Côte de Bordeaux AOC with maximum yields of 45 hectolitres per hectare. These wines may be botrytis affected or simply late harvest, and the wines are good to very good in quality and inexpensive to mid-priced. I think everyone's head probably now needs a break, and it is much better an idea to go and stimulate the palate instead. So I have not covered the details of the classification systems, 1855 classification, the 1959 Grape classification, Saint-Emilion Grand Cru classification and the Cru Bourgeois de Médoc. We haven't talked about Bordeaux wine business, including the Place de Bordeaux or the En Premier system. There are already links in the show notes to other episodes where I have gone into a little bit more detail on them, so go and check that out. But this is important. If you are doing your final exams, you do still need to cover them. So sorry, this is not included in this episode. But next week, I'm taking the idea of longevity even further. If Bordeaux is home to some of the world's most age-worthy wines, bottles that can quietly evolve over 40, 50 years or more, the question is, what is actually happening in the bottle over all that time? So we're going to be exploring exactly that as we move into the science of aging wine with wine expert Kelly White. And as always, a wine quote to finish off, and this one is said by Jean-Antelme Brillat-Savarin, and he is known as the father of gastronomy. He said, "Burgundy makes you think of silly things, Bordeaux makes you talk about them, and Champagne makes you do them." Well, with that in mind, I hope you all have a wonderful week ahead, and ideally one where you manage to think, talk, and do all three in good company. If you're enjoying the podcast or getting value from it, it would mean a huge amount if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a rating on Spotify or wherever you're listening, and even better, share it with a fellow wine lover. It genuinely helps the podcast grow and keeps these episodes flowing your way. Whatever your week looks like, make it one of curiosity, good company, and great wine in the glass. Until next week, wine friends, cheers to you.